Thank you for tuning into this video. So it's a bit of a departure from what I normally do, model kits, which even that was a bit of a departure from the commercials that I posted. But hey, it's the holidays, so here's some cookies for that you can try making. Since the recipe is right in front of you, this will give you time to look at it, copy it down, whatever, so that you're not having to frantically pause. I'm just going to give some backstory on it, because I hate it with those blogs or whatever where you can get a recipe from where they give you I don't know, a copy of Ulysses about their life story and the history of those cookies before finally they give you 3 sentences about the recipe for the cookies. And that's really all you come down there for, the recipe, how to cook them. So they give you their life story first that you got to scroll through and spend like 5 minutes scrolling through. But here, there's a purpose of giving the background on this. It's because the recipes are right there, right in front of you. Write them down, take pictures or whatever, go try them yourself. And I'll go over my experiences with 2 of them. I only made 2 of them. I didn't make the 3rd one yet. Maybe I'll do a sequel video if I ever get around to doing that. So the origin of these recipes is interesting, sort of, kind of, at least to video game nerds. In the early 90s, there was a video game released on 3 systems called Yoshi's Cookie. It was sort of like Candy Crush, I guess, and along that vein of a sort of puzzle type game. But it was with cookies, and Mario had to match a bunch up, and otherwise there'd be too many, and I guess he couldn't cook them in time or something like that. Not really sure what was supposed to be happening there. But then, a few years after that came out, Panasonic, they had this special oven come out in Japan that had some automated settings on it. So in honor of that, they released 500 copies of a special Yoshi's Cookie game that tells you how to use that oven to make 3 of the cookies featured in the original set of games. And these are the recipes for these 3. This was not released in English. I had to use Google Translate on my phone to figure out what the heck the recipes were saying. This is a pretty good translation of it. And I also had to translate the units of measurement too. As you can see, the original ones were in grams. So that being a unit of mass, it doesn't exactly translate well or evenly to pounds, because that also depends on how your elevation is, and also just what the material is that you're taking the mass of and converting it to a weight, because 10 grams of feathers will have a very different weight than 10 grams of lead, for example. But these are pretty good estimates. They came out with a pretty good recipe. I also had to estimate the cooking times. The game only has you select a cooking time on the oven. That's like, I don't know what that translates to. It's like you just go to the setting for Yoshi's Cookies or whatever and pick that. But it doesn't show you how long that is or how hot the oven gets when doing that. So I had to improvise on this based on the ingredients. I had to reach out to some baking professionals. I'm using the air quotes here. I just asked my mom. But because she makes cookies similar to some of these recipes, so I figured, well, maybe the cooking times and temperatures would be similar. And sure enough, they were. Good enough for government work, right? These heart-shaped ones had 2 names, according to the game. One was molded cookies. That's what it said when you selected them from the menu. But then when you finally start cooking them, they're called cutout cookies. So maybe that's just a translation thing, where molded cookie and cutout cookie translates from the same thing in Japanese. Not really sure, but the translator did give me these 2 separate translations of the name. But it only gave me one for the checkerboard thing. It just called them checkerboard cookies. However, for the flower-shaped cookies, they were called squeeze cookies or digger cookies. I think the digger cookie might be a mistranslation there. I can understand squeeze cookie, though, because you do have to squeeze them out of one of those special baker tubes that they use for icing. Let's start with the hearts, because that required the most improvisation. In the game, you can see that the hearts have some sort of red thing on top of them, red layer of something. I've seen some people call that icing. I always thought it was jelly. There was no instruction given for what that is, so I just used some generic strawberry jelly, had the right color. But as far as weighing out the measurements, though, if you want to really be exact, then it probably helps to have a kitchen scale on hand, because 50 grams looks like it'd be easier to measure than 0.77 cups, right? So you do 3/4 of a cup and just a little more, but what is a little more? I also found while making them that you might need to refrigerate them between rolling and cutting because it can become slimy and runny as it gets warmer. And I was able to cut about 9 or so before I had to stick it back in the fridge. Now I could tell from the ingredients and the amounts that the yield would be kind of small. Comes out with like, I guess, snacks for 2 or 3 lunches or whatever. But in the game it looks like a heck of a lot more, I guess because they cut them way smaller. I used the smallest cutter that I had and still didn't get a numerically large number of cookies, certainly not as many as you see in the video game. Now what I did for the cooking time was 20 minutes at 325 degrees Fahrenheit. Probably should have been more like 20 minutes at 300 since the middle of the bottoms were a little soft, but the outsides were hard, meaning the outside cooked too fast because it was too hot in the oven, so lower the temperature just a little bit. Cooking time, though, that was just a guess. I was using a toaster slash air fryer slash oven combo. A regular oven is preferable. You probably get a more even cooking instead of the front being cooked less than the back, as I did. So maybe try it with a real oven before changing the cooking time. Though all of them ended up like this, including the ones in the back that were a little light brown. They all ended up with a kind of mushy middle. It wasn't as undone as I'm making it sound. It was all pretty well cooked, but it wasn't perfect. And it was after cooking them that I smeared the jelly on, and then I froze them to harden the jelly. If you want to play around with it, you can make them like the thumbprint cookies where you have just a tiny layer of jelly on the top when you cook them. Perfectly fine. Again, nothing in that recipe said what the heck that red stuff was, so if you want to do a dark red icing or a cherry jelly or strawberry jelly, just anything dark red, just perfectly fine. On to the checkerboard cookies. If you followed the letter of the instruction as written in the game, then you would find yourself without the vanilla section of this cookie. It does not tell you how to make the vanilla section of the cookie. I'm just guessing it leaves it to your common sense to do exactly what you do for the cocoa part, just don't put the cocoa in there. Which is how I ended up doing this. I did not put the cocoa in there, and I otherwise used exact equal amounts of ingredients, and ended up with the vanilla part. It worked just fine. There was no issue with the texture or anything, no issue when cooking it. So I'm just going to assume that that's how you're supposed to do it. And there's really 2 things you can do at this point as far as shaping them. You can stick the vanilla and the cocoa ones separately in the freezer. I just rolled them up in parchment paper, stuck them in the freezer, let them harden a bit, not be as sticky as they are when you're freshly done making the dough, and then take them out and mold them. Or I made 2 batches of these. You could also mold them right after you're done making them. Mold them into rectangles and freeze them that way. Doesn't matter, however you're most comfortable doing it. The recipe does say to do it the second way that I did it, with molding them into rectangles and then sticking them in the freezer, not freezing them first and then molding them later. But it doesn't seem to affect the outcome either way you did it, except to make it slightly easier to mold them. And then naturally after you're done molding them into the rectangular shape, rectangular prisms, very long rectangular prisms, you then mush them together and cut them in half, flip one half upside down, and then re-mush them together and freeze them again for a little bit. Then take them out to bake after you cut them into 1/2 centimeter long squares. For these I ended up doing about 30 minutes in the oven at 325 degrees. This worked out because, well, it's my toaster oven. I did it for 20 minutes at 325 degrees because these ingredients are basically the same as for the earlier heart-shaped cookies. However, after 20 minutes it wasn't quite done, stuck it back in for another 10 minutes, and that ended up being just fine. So maybe 30 minutes overall at 325 would work for you. The second batch I cooked differently, and it leads me to believe that 20 minutes at 325 would be a just fine setting, because I did it in my oven as opposed to my toaster oven, and I thought my oven ran cold. By that I mean I thought that if I had set it to 325 it would actually be cooking around 300, just based on the last time that I used the oven a few months ago. Because of that, I set it to 350 for 20 minutes, Some of them came out burnt, but some other ones came out pretty good actually. More cooked than they were supposed to be, but they were still good, and everyone I gave them to liked them very much. Also, another tip, put them in the middle rack, not in the bottom rack. And don't be afraid to overcook them just a little bit. Apparently they'll still be fine. And that is it. Thank you for taking the time out of your holiday to join me and learn how some of these cookies in the Mario universe were made. And if you want to check this out yourself or double check my translations, there's plenty of people out there playing this game. And in the description, I have the full title of the video game written out there. So feel free to go on and Google that and try some of these for yourself. These are actually quite yummy.